My mother always used to tell me that I was a bloody good liar. If you are going to tell a lie, then tell the lie close to the truth. Because then that lie becomes that much more powerful. It becomes believable.
Birth of the reader is the death of the writer. It's so profound. If you start worrying about what you're writing, how would it be taken by some reader, or what would the reader think? Am I ignoring this particular community of readers? Shall I include something so that it will placate them? That's the death of you.
Easy reading is damn hard writing.
Yes.
You have to work on each and every sentence 10 more times in order to make it go down easily.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's such an honor and a privilege to be on the same stage as Ashwin.
Which hasn't, the stage hasn't fallen down yet.
Absolutely, and he's my elder brother. He is younger by age, but he looks elder. That's another matter. But
bhai to hu na?
हाँ भाई, भाई, absolutely भाई है. And in this lovely auditorium, which I remember from last year, I think I was with Jay Sai in one of the things, and absolutely brings back wonderful memories of SRCC. Before I begin on, asking you a lot of questions about this new book, I have to ask you the name of the person, the main protagonist. Now, you're a Mumbaikar. The name itself, Kutta Kadam, sounds like you're from Delhi. Delhi se hoon. I don't want to complete that end wala. तो आप मुंबई से दिल्ली वाले ये कुत्ता कदम मिस्ट्री की जरा मिस्ट्री क्या है ये बताइए.
So actually, Anand, most people, including my dearest friends, know me for my Bharat series, correct? And but along the way in this journey of the last 15 years, from time to time I deviate into other genres. One of the deviations that happened along the way was crime thrillers. And I ended up writing 2 crime thrillers along with James Patterson. And both of those had a protagonist, which was a guy called Santosh Wagh. And I realized that when I was actually writing about him, people love flawed characters, where the character is not, where you cannot figure out as to what is going on with this character. It's not black or white, it's shades of gray. And I wanted to create this sort of a flawed character. So I thought about this when I was researching for my crime thrillers earlier. I had done the rounds of the police stations and had spoken to former cops. I had gone to morgues. I had visited, places which are relevant to the crime beat, as it were. And then I realized, I said, there are those cops who just go down in history because of the fact that they are not really bothered about the rules. And I thought about this character called Kadam. But someone who is so dogged, so completely determined that he is going to get to the bottom of a particular case, that people around him think of him as a sniffer dog. वो sniffer dog होता है ना police department में, to go and find the clue. So I thought, what if I have a character which is like that? And that is the reason why the people around him then call him Kutta. It's not actually derogatory. It's actually, in some ways, talking about his uncanny ability to be able to sniff out the truth. A little bit like your uncanny...
It's got nothing to do with your referencing Delhi in this. No.
And it's a little bit like your uncanny ability to also reach the truth, but in a different way.
Are you calling me Kutta Ranganathan? No, but I think a couple of things come up as questions immediately. Sure. One is, and I won't call it delving into philosophy just as yet, but Naipaul, whom we all know as one of the greatest writers, he said you can't write without having accumulated enough material. What he meant was that even The non-fiction, of course, has to be non-fictional, so material has to be there.
He's setting me up, guys.
No.
He's setting me up. I can make out
No.
that I'm being set up right now.
No,
But anyway,
no,
please carry on.
no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But he said even for the fictional books that he's written, he needs material. And he's one of those writers, if you read all his books, you would realize that he has exhausted each and every experience that he's ever had, down to the plane and the ship that he took when he went from Trinidad to Europe or Britain. And he's used them. And you get to know not only from his books, non-fictional books, but also from Patrick French, magisterial biography of his, the late Patrick French. Now, the question is, how much do you agree with that, Ashwin, that even for writing fictional books, you need to have had a non-fictional experience to then use them as material for your fictional book?
You know, Anand, मेरी पहली किताब थी 2007 की, The Rosabal Line. And at that time, obviously, no one knew me. And the very first time when that book came out, I think it was launched sometime middle of 2008. And then my publisher of that time said that, listen, we'd like to hold a small press conference. So about 8-10 press walas were there, and then one of them, a rather cheeky fellow, he said, what is your qualification to write this? He says, tum Marwadi banya, training in MBA, finance. Suddenly one fine day tum kehte ho ki you have written this theological thriller. What
Was
is
a
your...
journalist asking you?
Yeah.
Was he from The Wire or? Just checking.
Did The Wire exist? 2007, 2008? Anyway, I was a little taken aback, but then I told him, I said, you know what? During my growing up years, my mother always used to tell me that I was a bloody good liar. That I could tell a lie with a straight face. And what fiction writers are doing is ultimately spinning yarns, right? We are attempting to find a more creative way of telling the lie. But the corollary to that story of telling a lie is that if you are going to tell a lie, then tell the lie close to the truth. Because then that lie becomes that much more powerful. It becomes believable. And that is what we all do as fiction writers.
And politicians as well.
But in politicians, we don't even try and be close to the truth. At least with fiction writers, we are still... Who was it who said that the difference between fact and fiction is that fiction must make sense? So in that sense, I think it was Tom Clancy, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, long and short is that I think, from my perspective, what I do is simply tell a story. And I try and make sure that my research is deep enough to be able to tell that story effectively. Let me give you an example. Many, many years ago, I was invited to a lecture in Kolkata. And I had time in the afternoon, so I told the driver, I said, take me around the city. So he said, Saab, aap kahan jayenge? Mandir le chalu. So now, obviously in Calcutta, it's taken for granted that it must be a Devi Mandir, Durga Mandir, something, Kali. So he took me to a mandir. I reached there. It didn't look like a mandir, Anand. It looked very, very ordinary. Must be not more than 15 feet by 15 feet, whitewashed walls. In the middle of the room, there was a green-colored throne. And when I looked closely, there were people praying, but on that green-colored throne, there was a portrait of Amitabh Bachchan. And I promise you, even though I'm a fiction writer, I'm not making this up. I promise you. This is real. And there were people doing aarti and all of that. I came out of there and I was still sort of feeling that I'm in some parallel universe. I was waiting for my car to come and pick me up. A little boy came along and in his basket he had agarbattis and mithai for prasad, and he had, samagri for going in, but I was coming out. The only thing that I did buy from him was a little booklet which was known as the Amitabh Chalisa. I bought it. It's there in my library. Now, here I am.
Jai Amitabh Gyan Gun Sagar.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's how it starts. Jai Amitabh Gyan Gun Sagar. So anyway,
Does it have a mention of any of his co-stars?
now you want to get me into trouble. But anyway, long and short is that I'm waiting for the car and I think to myself, I say, Ashwin, okay, what if this car right now comes along and his brakes fail and he knocks you down and you die on the spot? And now, as per karmic theory, you take birth 1,000 years later. And 1,000 years later, the cult of Amitabh worship has really caught on. And now there isn't this one temple in Calcutta. Now there are 1 lakh temples across the country. And someone asks you, do you think Amitabh could have been a real man? But that's the very question that we are asking today about people like Ram and Krishna and so many other great heroes from the past. And by the way, everyone, Jai Shri Ram. And what better place to be saying that than in Shri Ram College? But the point is that ultimately, I realized that I had a formula in my head. I realized that what I wanted to do was to take 2 particles. You're a scientist, CERN collider, to take 2 particles and put them into that collider and bring them charging towards one another at a very high speed. One of those particles is called myth, and the other particle is called history. And when they get fused, you'll end up with a completely new and alien particle. And my formula is myth plus history is equal to mystery, period. So that's how my mysteries come up.
Very beautifully said, I have to say this. Now, on that line, Ashwin, you brought out the, Ram Temple and, that connotation. Now, a lot of us, ever since 2014, have been branded, labeled.
Oh yeah, of
Sanjeev,
course.
me, everyone, and now we have accepted it. आप तो जन्म से ही संघी हैं.
बिल्कुल.
So, do you feel that, how shall I put it, the reception to your books and the way people perceive you, the author as well, do you think that has changed in the last decade or so?
No, I think to a very great extent, there was a time where, you will recall this, Anand, 2008, 2009, when I was getting started out. I think that was roughly the same time that, in fact, the Rosabal line came out, as well as Amish's Immortals of Meluha came out same time, around 2008, 2009. And the question we used to be asked at that time was that, do you have an agenda?
I remember.
Do you have an agenda? Why are you suddenly writing these sort of books? And frankly, none of us at that time knew that these were going to end up constituting a genre. We did not know that. By the time that Chanakya chant came out and the Krishna key came out, and it had taken on a momentum of its own, I did not know that I was sitting on something which was resonating with people. So at that point of time, people used to ask me that, why are you doing this? Does it have something to do with your name? Is it because you are a Sanghi? Now, first of all, most people don't understand that I'm Ashwin Sanghi. I'm not Sanghi. But nevertheless, I'm happy to
Zomato.
I'm happy to be included in that, because honestly, I have never seen myself as being either on this side or that side of a so-called ideological spectrum. I am because what I'm noticing is that dividing line has been shifting dramatically. So you may be standing in one place, but suddenly you find that line has shifted. So I find myself to be standing on a particular part of that spectrum where I always was. But now no one asks me, why do you write it? Either there are those who assume that I've written it with an agenda, Or there are those who think that this is the most natural thing that should be done. And I'm quite happy for you to make your own assumptions about why I do it.
So there's a feeling of comfort that's come in.
Bilkul.
Right.
And that has happened in the last decade. Let's be very clear about this, that it is a story of the last decade that people like us are comfortable in our own skin.
You know, being comfortable is one thing, and I think that's, according to me and according to you as well, all important. But one of the most profound statements or truisms that struck me, and I've always held it very close to my heart as an inspiration, was saying by Barthes, the French writer. And he said, the birth of the reader is the death of the writer. It's so profound. If you start worrying about what you're writing, how would it be taken by some reader, or what would the reader think? Am I ignoring this particular community of readers? Shall I include something so that it will placate them? That's the death of you. Now, you've obviously never thought along those lines, but the question is, have you or have your publishers worried about that because you are now, there's a sense of comfort that's come in, you're unapologetic about your views? Not you, but have your publishers told you you might be losing a constituency of readers? I'm trying to be as politically correct as I can, but no. I think you get the gist.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and that
would many people be offended by your otherwise views and not read your books? That's what
I'm sure there are, but frankly, in so many years, I have not come across someone who came back to me. I mean, I get a ton of feedback every day, either on social media or on email or on messaging platforms. I get a ton of feedback. I've yet to come across someone who said, listen, I think you have an ideological problem. Because the truth of the matter is that when I'm writing my story at that point of time, I'm not looking at it from an ideological prism. I'm simply wanting to tell the best goddamn story there is. You know, मेरा मानना है कि ultimately, you know, even when I go back to my editor or my publisher, I don't ask them, you know, were the words flowing or not? Did they sound right or not? The only thing I ask them is that did you turn the page or did the page turn itself? And that is a critical element when it comes down to storytelling. There are very good writers, there are very good editors, but not everyone is a storyteller. And that's exactly what I am. And I don't worry about the fact that I'm going to be misunderstood, because honestly speaking, if you start doing that, then you get into that spot where you begin to now sort of almost prejudge what is going to be the reaction to something that you wrote. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but Ashwin, you know, try as you might. If somebody wants to thrust a label on you or to...
But वो तो हो चुका है.
Yeah. But what I meant was that when you're saying that you do not want to perceive your books that you're writing to come across as some sort of manifesto or ideologically this way or that. But your characters, you can't escape your characters being ideological, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for example, there are many things that, you know, Kadam says in here that I can very easily relate to. You know, and by virtue of the fact that I'm relating to that, Kadam has already been pigeonholed. You know what I mean? So, do you want to escape that, or do you think that's you take it by your stride?
Most of the characters in an Ashwin Sanghi book are usually the embryo is typically someone in real life. So when I wrote, for example, Chanakya's Chant, people asked me that character of Ganga Sagar Mishra, who is it based on? Because they said, "Arey, तुमने ये अमित शाह पे लिखा है."
Chanakya.
Right? So this is an Amit Shah character in the modern day. And then I have to explain to him that, listen, I wrote and published Chanakya's Chant in early 2010 when Amit Shah hadn't even come onto the national political scene, as it were. That is a story which happens 3 or 4 years later. But
you have a character based on Rahul Gandhi? just asking. Young, pre-adolescent.
There are... I genuinely believe that you should have all types of characters in your books. And that is indeed a character which needs to be written about. But having said that, if I'm just going back for a moment into Chanakya's chant, that there were certain aspects of that character, Gangasagar, which came actually from Narasimha Rao. There were some character traits which came from Atal Bihari Vajpayee. There were some character traits which were of Mayawati. All of those were merged together into that character of Gangasagar Mishra. And in fact, we, when we were kids, we used to have one Master Ji. He was a UP Master Ji. He used to come home, हमको पहाड़े सिखाने के लिए. Multiplication tables for the kids who don't know what a pahada is. And those, he used to be wearing a dhoti kurta, and he had a chhata in his hand. And in case one missed out on the pahada, he would rap you on the knuckles with the umbrella. And I realized that that was the sort of look that I wanted for my character Gangasagar Mishra. So every character in every book is actually based on someone who has actually existed, or I've come across, or I have met. For those of you who don't know this, the Krishna key is about a person who thinks of himself as the final avatar of Vishnu. He thinks of himself as Kalki. But how did that character come to my mind? That character came during a dinner party where there was another gentleman who was as many drinks down as me. So probably 3 or 4 hours into the conversation, he claimed to be Kalki. Now, at that moment, I must tell you guys that I have always believed.
So you met Kejriwal then?
I have always believed, and I've lived by the maxim, that there is nothing that a peg of whiskey cannot cure. But that day's hangover was a very different one, because I got up in the morning and I was wondering that did this guy actually say this to me? Did he actually say it? And I said, no. The mere fact that I'm thinking about this means that he did say it. And then it prompted me to call for the English translation of the Kalki Puran and to read it. So I have never bothered in terms of what is the ideological bent of the character. I simply tell it like it is, Anand. I know it's difficult to understand that. Maybe my inherent biases must be coming into those characters. Undoubtedly. How is that possible? That you won't have your own biases reflected in the character. But it's not something that I'm doing consciously. When I was reading your last mystery novel, Souffle, and by the way, for those of you who haven't read that, please read Souffle, because it is an outstanding mystery novel. Outstanding.
Thank you.
And in fact...
But I have to interrupt you and say this. Unlike Ashwin, the people who read my books possibly are my family, near and dear ones. So I don't have to worry about a lot about what the publisher might come and say, कि यार यार ये क्या लिख दिया आपने? Maybe.
The whole world of self-publishing, I remember when I had just started out, at that point of time, I had to self-publish because most of the publishers had said no to that first manuscript. And
Amish, Immortals of Malwa
was also self-published. So, and in those days, the statistic was that if you were self-published, like for example, in that first year, I sold about 800 books as a self-published author. And the self-publishing company came and told me, do you realize that you're on the top of our list? I said, why? It's 800. मैंने कौन सा कोई great achievement कर लिया है? He said, no, do you realize what the average sale of a self-published title is? I said, what? He said, it's about 56 copies during the lifetime of the book. And mostly to the author's friends, family, rishtedar, and all of that. So he said, and that is what gave me the confidence to go to the next step. So I honestly...
There's a Bollywood star who has a garage or godown full of books that his wife wrote that he bought in order to jack up this copy sales. They both shall remain nameless. But yeah, you know who I'm talking about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Have you visited the Godown?
No, I've not visited the home. There's the question of visiting the Godown. Where I'm coming from is that it really doesn't matter. Everyone starts out at some place, no? I used to get rejected all of the time. I mean, during the years between 2005 and 2007, in front of my desk, I had a bulletin board which had numbers on it. 12, 18, 33, 38. So people used to come and ask, what is this? And actually 12 was the number of times that the first book in the Harry Potter series was rejected by publishers. And I can assure you most of them have committed suicide by now. Or 18 was the number of times that Jonathan Livingston Seagull was rejected. 30 was the number of times that the first novel by Stephen King was rejected. 33 was the number of times Chicken Soup for the Soul was rejected.
Even George Orwell's Animal Farm was rejected.
Absolutely. 38 was the number of times that Gone with the Wind was rejected. And then finally, with great pride, I put another number at the end of it, 47, which was the number of literary agents and publishers that said no to me. So I, frankly...
Discovery of India, how many times it was rejected, I don't know.
It is yet to be discovered. But having said that, everyone goes through that process of Agni Pariksha, no? My own thinking process in these matters, Anand, has been shaped by an old family friend, a Punjabi uncle. He used to come very often and sit and chat with my dad on the weekends. And they used to love pouring whiskey for each other. Johnny Walker Black Label, they would pour, and with a lot of love for one another. So, how many of you know what a Patiala peg is? Yeah? Okay. Show of hands, please.
Very gingerly the hands are going up because
okay.
this is being video recorded and their parents...
A Patiala peg is basically 3 fingers of whiskey, but not held this way, but this way. Okay? So that is what a Patiala peg is. So they would pour themselves these Patiala pegs. And one day this gentleman, he asked me, he said, Beta, tum bade depressed lag rahe ho, kya ho gaya hai? What is the matter? And I said, but uncle, no one is publishing me. What am I supposed to do? Almost 40, 45 have said no. So he said, Arey, can I tell you, beta, in life, it's all about good luck. But I was that day in a very argumentative mood. So I asked him, I said, but what about management? What about talent, resources, networking? There are so many things besides luck that must be important. So he picked up his whiskey. And Anand, I've never seen whiskey go down so fast. I can't have the whole water. But that's the way he took it, gulped it down, glugged it down. And then he slammed it on the table, the glass. And he said, in life, 99% is good luck and 1% is bloody good luck. And all I've done in my life, Anand, is run after that 1% bloody good luck, and touch wood, it happened. That's all.
You got married. That's good luck or bloody good luck?
Now,
bloody bad luck.
वो तो उससे पूछना पड़ेगा.
No, but Ashwin, I think before, I would really like to throw it to the audience for some wonderful question and answer thing. They would love to ask you a lot of probing questions. Last question before I do is, we are living in an era of attention deficit disorder, you can call it. Fewer and fewer people, younger generation are reading, and this is not, I'm being judgmental. I think it's a good thing. The mediums are changing. So it's an audio-visual era we're living in now. When you write a book, are you aware that it would be appreciated more if it were to switch to an audio-visual thing? In the sense that, do you have it at the back of your mind that this would be taken up by an OTT or something?
Yeah, and one of the reasons why none of my books have actually made it as yet to OTT or cinema is simply because they are not written for that medium. Because if I feel that I need to provide you with 2 pages of historical material in between, I will. Because I feel that it adds to the story.
So can we have a round of applause for this thinking?
Thank you.
This is what a true writer should do, not get swayed by what is the current flavor of the season.
And not only that, but I genuinely believe that long term, what you do is you try and build up a readership which is looking for that type of material. Now, that is not to say that I have not signed deals for OTTs and for movies. Some of them are in various stages of adaptation, but I know how difficult it is to pick up an Ashwin Sanghi book and to actually take it to that medium. The other part of it is also, Anand, that I don't make that effort, but typically when I'm writing, there are people who come back to me and say, "Arey, how do you write a bestseller?" Well, I turn around and tell them that, actually what, it's not rocket science. Rather simple. Your first paragraph of the novel, like a pothole in Bombay or Delhi, where if a man falls in, he has very little chance of getting out because you've sucked him into that story by virtue of what you've said. Every chapter should be like a hook, which forces the reader to turn to the next chapter. So it should be sticky. And finally, the last paragraph should be almost, you could say, like a contentment burp at the end of a meal, where you feel that sense of satisfaction that all the loose ends have been tied up. Now, if you can do that, then in my opinion, you've written a story that is going to be easy to read. And as you know, the old proverb goes, no, that easy reading is damn hard writing. Yes. You have to work on each and every sentence 10 more times in order to make it go down easily. And that's what I try and do to the best of my ability. And with every book, I try and ensure that I'm maybe 3, 4, 5% slightly better than the last one. But I make no bones about the fact that I am work in progress. So for the rest of my life, I will be work in progress. So when people write to me and say, listen, what you wrote was not really up to par. Genuinely, I must tell you, the only reaction is, I'm sorry, I will try harder.
Well, Ashwin, everyone's a work in progress. And there is, I firmly believe, no one is an expert, least of all a scientist. I mean, the next thing you know, the whole field is upside down and you knew nothing about it. So, that's not. Before I throw it open, one last question about a writer, a prolific writer, famous writer, bestseller. Do you have distractions? Do you consciously keep away from them? Or do you welcome them and in the knowledge that you would use those as material for your book?
No, most people think that writing is this very romantic activity that you sit in front of a blank piece of paper and then suddenly the words will flow. In my case, Anand, I have never been that type of writer. For me, a typical book in my Bharat series takes me 2 years to write, of which the first 6 months is purely the bedrock of research, because I need to first educate myself about the subject before I can even start planning it. So to give you an example, a book like Keepers of the Kal Chakra, for me it was one of the most difficult books to write because I don't have a science background. And suddenly I needed to learn the fundas of quantum theory in order to be able to write Keepers of the Kal Chakra so that I could compare it in some ways with Vedant. So it was almost 8 or 9 months of struggling before I could start approaching it. Then the next 3 to 4 months is purely plotting, where I will typically put down every chapter and it will be written down on an Excel sheet. That is where the old Banya part of it comes in. Each chapter, I will know what happens in that chapter within 100 words, but most importantly, I will know where that chapter ends and how it pushes you into the next. So once I'm done with that plot, that's when I sit down to actually start writing. And that is the easiest part The last 6 months when I'm actually writing, that is the easiest bit. It's like a coloring book. Outlines सब बने हुए हैं. आपको सिर्फ decide करना है कि red crayon लेना है या blue crayon लेना है. At that time, you're just giving it the finishing touches. So in that sense, for me, every morning between 5 o'clock and 9 o'clock is those hours when I'm writing, and that never varies. No matter how tired I may be, I will still write because I am looking forward to writing the next chapter.
I would like to ask Ashwin sir, writers like you or Amish, people who write the so-called mythological fiction. So do you ever see ki in 500 or 1000 years, people might believe that this was actually what happened, and people might take it as mythology. And what do you think? What we think as mythology or as ancient history today might have been somebody's fiction of that time.
Of course. First of all, I must tell you, I personally have a problem with the word mythology. But because I believe that there is that old statement by C.S. Lewis, no? He said that a myth is a lie that reveals a truth. So in other words, you need to dig under the layers to be able to find that truth. Because I don't believe that something like, let's say, 300 versions of the Ramayana would have been written about someone called Ramchandra ji, unless and until there was someone who had done something great at some point of time. And then along the way, हमने अपने layers उस पे add कर दिए हैं. So, for example, within the Ramayana also, you'll see so many variations. If you start with, let's say, the Valmiki Ramayana, Ram is simply Maryada Purushottam. By the time you come to the Tulsi Ramayana, he has become a Vishnu avatar. But if you go into, let's say, the Anand Ramayana, then you find that the abduction is not of Sita but of Kaushalya. Or you go to the Adbhut Ramayana, then Sita is the one who manifests as Durga in order to actually kill Ravan. And then these are only the ones which are in India. You go beyond that to, for example, the ones from Southeast Asia. They have very, very different stories to tell you. But what is common to them is that there was someone called Ram, right? So I don't believe that so many versions would have happened without a kernel of truth. Now the question arises is that do books like mine or Amish's or Anand Neelkanthan or so many others, can they be seen as the de facto truth 300 years from now? Well, you know what? You are already doing that. For example, when I wrote Chanakya's chant, I had to rely on the Arthashastra, but also, while Chanakya wrote a lot of stuff, very little was actually written about Chanakya. So most of the material about Chanakya comes to us from a work known as the Mudra Rakshas, which was written almost 700 years after Chanakya had already passed away. It was written by Vishaka Datta, and it was a Sanskrit play meant to be performed on stage. Now the question you have to ask yourself is that was Vishaka Datta a historian, or was Vishaka Datta an ancient day Ashwin Sanghi who was picking up some things that he knew and then sort of mixing it up with a whole lot of fiction so that it could provide entertainment? So in that, but now most of the material that we have on Kautilya is stuff that comes to us from the Mudra Rakshas. So in other words, we are treating it as de facto history. So that is what happens. And that's why I've always believed that those who say that history should be free of a bias, they don't know what they're talking about, because the narrator's bias is always going to be there.
And also, I think ours is a land where we are born to tell stories,
Exactly.
and mostly oral tradition. So,
Exactly.
for example, we don't have that Herodotus kind of line of approach. I mean, Padmavat, for example. Yeah. Many people doubt the authenticity of what actually happened, but people carry on narrating it. Yeah. It is part of our, so this folklore or fable, how much of truth, how much of reality it is. Anyway, wonderful question.
Yeah.
Maybe one more. Sorry.
Let me just end. One of my favorite lines on this is George Santayana, who said that history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, written by people who were never there. So in that sense, take history also with a rather big pinch of salt.
So you've met Romila Thapar also.
Good evening, sir. I'm Premansh Sinha, currently a second year student of political science at Ramjas College. I would be very honest, my question is very basic and a crazy fanboy nature. What will we ever get to see a book or a short essay where Professor Ravi Mohan Saini of Stephens College, Pandit Gangasagar Mishra of Chanakya's Chant, and Linda from Magicians of Mazda would get together to solve a single mission, something like
Wonderful.
and Avengers Infinity War of India series? Thank you so much.
Great question.
So sweet. What is your name?
Prem Ansh Sinha.
Nice to meet you, and thank you for that very, very, very sweet question.
I think they should get together.
See. No, I'll tell you, my problem is that with most of my books, I tend to, by the time I'm done writing the book, I get bored of that particular character and story. So that's the reason why in the entire Bharat series, you will find that there is never a repeat of the character. It doesn't become like a serial of sorts. Even though it's called the Bharat series, the only thread that is actually connecting the Bharat series is the concept of Bharat itself. And a lot of people ask me this, that what do you mean by that? Well, I am fascinated by the fact that there was an ancient Vedic arc of influence. I mean, I'm proud of the fact that if I go back into, when I was writing Magicians of Mazda, two ancient kingdoms, the Hittites and the Mitanni, are signing a peace accord in 1380 BC. And they start the accord by invoking Indra and Varun. I am proud of the fact that the Egyptian pharaohs have a name like Ramses. I'm proud of the fact that you can go, the largest Vishnu temple is not located in India. Maybe now I would imagine maybe Ram Mandir might be bigger, but Angkor Wat for the longest time was the largest Vishnu temple in the world. I'm proud of the fact that even today you have in Thailand a royal dynasty that takes the title of Lord Rama X. Or the fact that the kingdom had a capital which was called Ayutthaya. And the entire kingdom itself was Siam, which is based on the word Shyam, which is the color.
So you've been to Bangkok quite a lot? Okay.
I have been very often, Anand, and one day I will write a book on that also.
Thank you.
Kya?
Will Rahul Gandhi be in it? But, before we go, Ashwin, one question that I've always...
the point I'm just making is that
sorry.
for me, that connective tissue is Bharat. And we need, because a lot of our generation doesn't even know the extent to which Bharat was not just in the geographical region that we call Bharat, but way, way beyond that. I mean, today we think of China as a distinct and separate land, but we forget that there were two monks who carried the Buddhist scriptures and went and sat in a place where now there is a temple known as the White Horse Temple, where they translated those scriptures. We forget when we look at all these martial arts movies that the ancient martial arts came to us from someone called Bodhidharma, who went from the Pallava kingdom. So these are many, many connections that I want to explore, and I want to bring them out in a very easy reading format. And I make no bones about it, that ultimately if I want to make this material accessible to today's kids and today's generation, I need to use what is called a 70-20-10. 70% I must entertain, because otherwise they will not turn the page. 20% along the way, you may come across material that you haven't read before, that's educate. And 10% at the end of the book, you may have an aha moment that why didn't I think of it this way? And that is the moment of enlightenment. So entertain, educate, enlighten, that's all I want to do.
Wonderful. One last question, 30 seconds if you don't mind. Yeah? And this is, I think, important for all the budding writers, and the more writers there are, the merrier, right, in the community. But this also has to be said. I mean, someone mentioned Amish, and there is Ashwin, there is Amish, there is Chetan. Other than 3 or 4 people, I can't think of a lot of Indian writers who can live off their writing. Leftist writers don't count because they live off George Soros. But how important it is to take up this field if you know that 99% of the time you will not be able to make a living off it. That's the
There are those who come and ask me that, is this something that I should do? And I say, listen, don't lose the day job. Because it's going to be a long, long time before the royalty checks are going to be of a value and at a frequency where you'll actually be able to live off it. If you're lucky at some point. So, I mean, I have literally like 4 or 5 very simple rules for those amongst the audience who are thinking about this. That number 1, don't think about writing. Many people keep thinking, can I be a writer? Don't think about writing, just write. It could be just 200 words a day, but write. Number 2, don't worry about what people will think about your writing. Because there are writers and then there are critics. And the relationship between writers and critics is really the relationship between the dog and the lamppost. So no matter what the lamppost does, the dog is going to do something with that lamppost. So that is, don't worry about that. The third part of it is that don't lose the day job. Make sure that you have your income coming, because otherwise it's very difficult to write when you're hungry. And I would say probably the fourth part of it is that in the event that you do attain a modicum of success, then look back on your work with a certain impartiality and realize that every word that came on paper was not your own, but it was a blessing from Ma Saraswati, and bow your head down and say, thank you, Ma.
On that lovely note, it leaves me to thank the audience, the organizers, and of course, my great friend Ashwin for this wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.